You guys ever seen a poker vlog filmed in a canoe, under a bridge, in your backyard? Yeah, I don't think so. Awesome session here. Let's get right into the action. For our first very exciting hand of note, we look down at the Black Kings in the big blind. Now, we are facing 5 limpers, so definitely got to make it big here if we have any chance of doing anything meaningful with this hand and getting some players out. So, over 5 limpers, we raise it up to 55, which is certainly pretty big, but that doesn't deter anybody at this room. We get 2 callers. We're going 3 ways to a pretty decently sized flop. To a flop that comes Jack, Deuce, 5 with 2 clubs. Pretty awesome board for kings, all things considered. I mean, a Jack high board is likely going to connect with hands like Queen Jack and Ace Jack. We're first to act, so we bet about half pot here, about 80. In hindsight, don't really like this bet because it's just not big enough into 2 people and it leaves the stack to pot ratio pretty awkward for the river. But we get 1 fold and 1 call, so we're going heads up to a turn, which is an okay-ish card, is the Queen of Hearts. You know, the couple combos of Queen Jack now beat us, but it's just now that I look over to see who we're actually up against, and I know this player, and they are known to chase down flush draws to the end of time. So an overbet jam here kind of makes sense, and just kind of taking a deep breath, hoping they don't have the couple combos of Queen Jack, we put the rest of our stack in the middle for a slightly overbet jam, and after a little bit of deliberation, the player makes the call. So we're going heads up to a final card, which is an absolutely beautiful card that you love to see. It's an offsuit deuce, so now we're actually ahead of Queen Jack. We show our kings, and the opponent mucks. But they actually said that we were good without the deuce, so they didn't have Queen Jack, and we're probably chasing that flush draw. Feels good to get the double up really early in the session, and hopefully we can get out of this downswing. Alrighty, keeping up the repertoire with the big pocket pairs, we look down at a couple of ladies under the gun, and we make it 25. Our dreams of value start diminishing as it starts folding around the table, but luckily the big blind gives us some action. So we're going heads up to a flop that comes 9, 10, 3 with 2 diamonds. Interestingly, the big blind decides that they like their hand, and they're going to lead into us for 20. So not really sure what to make of this. I really never know what the donk lead means, because it means so many different things for different people. Against this older gentleman, I think the right play here is to just call. So we make the call. We're going heads up to a turn, which is a card you really hate to see. It's a king of diamonds, so now the flush get there, an overcard gets there against our queens, and some very unlikely straights get there. The player in the big blind again decides to lead for 30. Now, our hand is definitely weaker than it was on the flop, but we do a diamond check, and unfortunately we've got the wrong red. But we do have a bluff catcher, and we've got some outs, we've got a gutter, so I think we can still profitably call this one here. So we make the call, and going heads up to a river, and the river is a very interesting card. It's the 9 of clubs, so it makes it less likely our opponent led with 9-10 here, although I don't think they'd do that anyway. I think they'd go for the check raise. But when the big blind decides to lead for 75, it puts us in a really awkward spot because we really don't beat a whole lot. And I saw this older gentleman check back pocket aces in a different hand against someone else on a pretty brick river. So I'm kind of thinking that they're not going to bet anything here that doesn't have 1 pair beat. If they just had a dry 10, I think they'd check that too. So I think the only thing we can really do here is fold. So we make the conservative laydown and let our chips breathe for another day. All right, I've got a really weird hand for you guys to look at here. We're in the cutoff with pocket aces, and we make it 30 over a couple limpers. The big blind is the only player that makes the call because the rest of the limpers fold. So we're going heads up to a flop that comes 6, 8, 9, all hearts. We do a heart check, and we do in fact have the ace of hearts, so we're drawing to the effective nuts. The big blind doesn't seem deterred though, and bets into us for 55, almost full pot. Not really sure what to make of this. Again, the donk means many different things for different people, so even if our opponent did somehow crush this flop, we've got a lot of equity against the big blind value range. So we make the call. We're going heads up to a turn, which comes just the perfect turn. I mean, probably the best card in the deck. It's the deuce of hearts. I mean, gives us the effective nut flush and doesn't block any of the other high card flushes. So The big blind seems to recognize this and slows down and checks. We got to build a pot here, so we bet 100. And the big blind calls very quickly, which is definitely kind of odd. Not really sure what to make of any of his plays here. But nonetheless, we're going heads up to a river, which is a perfect offsuit non-board pairing jack. And what's even more perfect is the big blind again leads into us for 100. Really, I don't know what to make of any of these leads, but we've got the effective nuts, so we're gonna push our stack in there. We go all in, and the big blind very quickly, angrily folds ace jack offsuit face up with the jack of hearts. And we return the favor and show him our nuts, and we take down a pretty healthy pot. Feeling pretty good to actually have the best hand, get it in, and be good. So with a big stack, plenty of winners shown, and 3 limps to us, we look down at ace jack offsuit in the small blind. We decide to pump the variance here and make it 30. We only get one player to call, who is actually the player that we stacked in the first hand, so we're going heads up to a flop, which comes ace 4-5, 2 clubs. The run good continues. We make a nice value bet here for 35, and the cutoff calls pretty quickly. Going heads up to a turn, which is an offsuit king. It's a pretty good card, all things considered, pretty good for our range, and it's going to be kind of hard for the cutoff to continue on this card, so we decide to check so we can hopefully induce a bluff. I'm just kidding. I wish we were that good. What actually happened in this situation is that I forgot that it was on me first, and the cutoff looked very ready to lead into us at the time, so I just kind of sat there and waited for it to happen. Yeah, not my proudest moment, but once I finally realized the crime I had committed, I checked out of panic. So we check, and then the cutoff checks back. So we're going heads up to a river with no value on the turn, which comes an offsuit 10. Doesn't really change the board much unless our opponent exactly has king 10 of maybe clubs or the king 10 king of clubs, but I don't know. We decide to bet 80 for value, and the cutoff calls pretty quickly. We show our ace jack and we're good. So yeah, maybe our mistake got us paid on the river. Who is to say? But feels good to scoop another decently sized pot at least. So playing cards that don't look the same is kind of scary, so we're gonna go back to what we were doing before. We look down at pocket 2s in late position, and we're facing a good number of limpers, so I don't really want to raise pocket 2s over this many players, so we decide to limp behind. The big blind, who is actually the big blind from when we had aces, decides that he's got other plans and raises to 20. There are 3 callers, and we close the action with a call, so we're going 5 ways to a flop that comes 7, 10, deuce with 2 diamonds. We make our set, let's go. This is a pretty dynamic board too, so it's very likely that this is going to be a monster pot. That's foreshadowing. It checks all the way to us, and into 4 people, we got to bet big here, so we bet about 2/3 pot, we bet 60. Definitely someone's going to have like a pair or a flush draw, or maybe even 2 pair that can pay us off on this board, right? Somehow every other player folds. I really couldn't believe that no one else connected with this board. I mean, I really expected that pot to be bigger, but nonetheless, we're pretty happy to take down the 100 in the middle and keep on going strong. Okay, we find ourselves under the bridge, but we also find ourselves in the big blind with queen jack offsuit. So there's an early position limp and a late position raise to 15. Certainly happy to defend the big blind here for such a cheap price, and the early position limper thinks so too. We're going 3 ways to a flop, which comes queen 7 deuce, 2 spades, pretty much the quintessential dry board that comes queen high. So we check to the raiser, who bets 20. Definitely not going anywhere with top pair here. We make the call, but the early position limper lets his cards go. So we're going heads up to a turn, which comes an offsuit 4. Now, in this situation, when we check to our opponent and they bet 50, it's definitely on the bigger side. It's 2/3 pot now, and we kind of have to decide how much we want to defend here. We can definitely be behind hands like aces, kings, and ace queen, but there's plenty of other big flush draws that our opponent's going to be betting, as well as maybe some lower pocket pairs. So I think what really tips this one over the edge is that we have queen jack with no spades, so our opponent can have all of the big spades. So we decide to defend here, really hoping that we can get to a cheap showdown. So we're going heads up to the final card, which is an offsuit 10. Doesn't really change much. The only hands we really lose to now are queen 10 and pocket 10s. So we check, really fearing the looming incoming barrel, but the sun shines down upon us as our opponent gives up and checks back. We show our queen jack and he says we are good. So feels good to have the guts to put the chips in and just make the correct defense. For the final hand of the session that we're going to talk about, we look down at the last big pocket pair that we have yet to play that features a face card, pocket jacks. there's a button straddle, both the blinds are folded, so we make it 35. The middle position player calls, and the button tags along too. So we're going 3 ways to a flop that comes 3, 6, 8 with 2 hearts. Now, there are a lot of open-enders that could be out there and a lot of flush draws, so we really got to charge those hands. We bet 50. Middle position player calls, and the button lets its cards go. We're going heads up to a turn, which comes an offsuit 8. In this situation, I think you could argue a very big bet or a very small bet. And in this situation, since it's less likely our opponent has an 8, it's more likely that they have some kind of draw, and because it's a paired board, those draws are going to feel less compelled to stick around since their hand strength has decreased. So I decided to go with a very small bet here to really try to incentivize those draws to stay in on this paired board. So we bet 50 again. Middle position player decides on the call, so we're going heads up to a final card, which is an offsuit ace. Not the greatest card considering that the ace high flush draw now beats us, so I don't really think we can get much better to call us, and anything else is probably going to raise us or beat us. So in this position, I decide to check, and our opponent checks back. And we get some kind of funny news. Our opponent turns over pocket 10s for a very similar idea to us, just kind of bluff catching. So we scoop that pot against pocket 10s, and we finish the session on a super solid note. Had an absolutely awesome time hitting rivers on the river with you guys. Just remember, you gotta get outside, gotta keep yourself healthy. Doesn't matter what the activity is, as long as it's outside and active. Remember, keep your body healthy, keep your mind healthy. This is Runner Poker. Have a good one.